we'll have a panel discussion where you'll hear from 4 individuals on the challenges and practices that their organizations are taking in terms of managing the LGBTQIA agenda. I'd like to invite Sindhu Aravindakshan to come on stage, who's the moderator. And Sindhu is the Senior HR Director at JDA Software. Along with that, I'd like to invite Pratyusha Sharma, who's also a Senior HR Director at Cognizant and D&I lead. And then Anupama Subramanian, who's the Director at Willis Towers Watson. And Vinod, the D&I lead from Thoughtworks.
So, did good for us, because at least now it has awakened you, and this topic I'm sure will awaken you further, because this is one topic that all of us definitely feel extremely passionate about, and it's also something that is a topic that a lot of us shy away from having a conversation, whether it is with our families and broader society. Corporates, I'm sure, are doing far better on this particular subject. So with that, I'm so glad, thanks to NASScom, thanks to Shivani and team for putting together this program, because I think the more we do this, there is more awareness, and I'm sure all of us, it becomes a way of life. It is not a topic that you really have to become conscious about to talk about, but it becomes a way of life. So having said that, true to the theme of the day, we have a pretty diverse panel here. People who have flown from Mumbai, Bangalore, and of course some localites too. So we really wanted a diverse panel. Thanks to each one of you for coming here and for giving an opportunity to moderate this panel. I think I have come a long way on this particular topic, and I'm going to share a quick one before I hand over the mic to each of my co-panelists to introduce themselves. And the good part of being a moderator is you get to ask all the questions, you need not necessarily answer them. So my co-panelists will do the answering, and I get to ask the questions. So with that, let me introduce myself. I'm Sindhu, and I'm Senior HR Director at JDA Software. Many years ago, 20 years ago, when I started working in an organization, my first job, I was too new to a lot of these, even the letters that you heard probably 10 years ago, which is LGBT, has of course got its extension. Many letters have got added. This true spirit of inclusion, and we'll talk a little about that in a bit. But when I started off my career, I had great colleagues, and there was this gentleman, I got along very well with him, and we kept going out for coffees, lunches, and one fine day he comes to me and he says, I want to talk to you. Can we have a cup of coffee? And I said, okay. I mean, we go out for lunches, we go out for coffees. Why is that today is a special day that you really want to talk to me? We talk every day. So he said, no, it's something that I really want to tell you. And for a brief moment, I got a little worried, saying, what is that conversation going to be? Because it is a guy and a girl conversation, and you can imagine what is going on in my head. And we finally go, and we're sitting opposite each other. There's a cup of coffee. And then he tells me that whatever I'm going to tell you now, just promise me that we're going to remain friends after that. Now, for a brief moment, my world, I had gone to a completely different world where here's a guy who's going to propose to me, and in a matter of few minutes, I'm supposed to say yes or no to him. Whatever I say, we're supposed to remain friends. And then I'm thinking of this parents meeting each other, and all those things are happening. So you can imagine a bubble here. And by then, the guy had already finished telling me what he had to tell me, which is, he happened to say, I'm a gay. And I missed the whole point. Because I was living in this world. I had family, children, my children had already started going to school by then. And here I was, and then he said it, and I looked at him, and I had no idea what he had understood that, we were really friends. And he walked out, and I kept wondering, what did he actually say? And for the next few days, I was struggling to figure out what actually took place there. And then, of course, I figured that out. But, acceptance from there to moderating a panel today, I think 20 years, I can pat on my back and say, I've come a long way. And so thank you so much for this opportunity. With that, I would like to I would like each of our co-panelists to introduce themselves. And if you do have any anecdotes that makes this panel a special one, do please share with us. So, Pratyusha, shall we start with you?
So thanks a lot, Sindhu, and good afternoon, everyone. I know it was a wonderful skit, but I think we are all charged up for the afternoon. So just to introduce myself, Pratyusha, I'm a Senior Director HR. I also lead the D&I Council for Cognizant at Hyderabad. And so I don't have a direct story like what Sindhu said, but when she said, it will be good for me to relate, and the journey started for me being able to accept and understand a couple of years back. And when I was a kid and I was a child, we used to come across the transgenders, right? And there were stories told by my parents. It's good luck, it's this, but I never knew. And then when I got into the corporate world, tried to understand. And I've been following, I'm sure all of you all know Gauri Sawant's story, as well as 2 years back, instead of Cognizant, which I will share more, I came across a transgender and I had a discussion with her. She said, there are 4.8 million of us in India. And really, what is it that we are doing? I don't think the education system is proper. I don't think we have the corporate skills, acceptance and buy-in. And the reason we all go into the sex working community is because we don't have opportunities. And I think, how do we really give them opportunities? And through the day we've been hearing, it's not the disability's ability, it's not decriminalization, and it's how do we really accept them. I think that's the time it really stuck me to do more and more work out of passion, to be able to have acceptance of this community and to give them more opportunities. So that's what.
Hi, my name is Anupama Subramanian. I represent a company called Willis, Watson. I was mentioning to somebody here that we are as old as a Titanic, and that really means it's not a joke. We were actually the brokers for the Titanic. So many sad stories, considering our industry is one of that. And I'm here because I work very closely with the Asia Inclusion and Diversity Council in Willis, Watson. We find a lot of common challenges in Asia. In certain cases like LGBT+, some of the other geographies within Asia are much more advanced from the sense of acceptance. My day job is a combination of human resources and risk management, a few other things. What strikes me as a personal story is very much like Sindhu. I always thought I was cool. I still do. And I remember this very talented and also very good looking, I have to admit. Not that I would say that anymore to him. Just because, once you become real good friends, you don't want to give compliments, right? I mean, so we went out to lunch. He had come from the US, from California. And on the way from lunch, he said, hey, you feel like catching a couple of drinks after work? It had been a while since anybody outside my usual circle had asked me to come up for an evening, so I was quite happy. And I said, absolutely, sure. I mean, secretly I was like, just clear the calendar, whatever happens, just make the time and go. And much before Virat Kohli made it really famous, he had a beard and he looked really good. And then he said, do you mind if I bring someone along? And my mind was racing because he's from the US, I knew who the travelers were, I was like, who else would it be? And then he said, remember, I'm cool. And he says, okay, so see you at 8. I hope you don't mind, but my husband isn't from the same industry. Still cool. Okay. So it did take me at least 2 seconds to collect myself, because I didn't have a problem with it. It's just that in the conditioning that we have and in the environment that we have, we don't encounter these situations as much. And you don't make an allowance sometimes for the kind of answer you may get. I mean, you expect the person to say, I'll bring somebody else to be, now because we are so much more progressive, it could even turn out to be a girlfriend, or it's just somebody that I'm seeing right now, or we've become that liberal. But I genuinely didn't expect that I would say husband. We had a brilliant evening. They're the closest of friends. Like I said, I've stopped giving them any compliments, because the closer of friendship, I believe you try and say really nasty things to each other. But that's where we are, and that was my introduction into this world. And hence a desire to work a lot towards this, particularly in India.
Hi everyone, I'm Vinod, and I head Diversity and Inclusion for Thoughtworks India. Like the way women have been objectified in our ads, in our movies, I think many of us have seen people from the LGBTQI community portrayed very, very negatively in our media, in our movies. And I remember some movies where the villain or the most scary character will be a trans person, right? And these things tend to influence us in a lot of ways, be it our religion, our culture, the way we see things differently, and that's how our conditioning is. I've had multiple opportunities through my young years to really understand these things, not very deeply, at a very surface level. At Thoughtworks, we define ourselves by our 3 pillars. The first pillar is sustainable business. The second pillar is revolutionizing IT. And the third pillar is advocating passionately for social and economic justice. And as part of this third pillar, years back, I was part of the social impact program. I think this must have been 2012, 13, 14. And through that, I got the opportunity to meet and work with an organization called Sangama. Now, Sangama works with sexual minorities and sex workers. And I attended a couple of their meetups. And I was just amazed at the discrimination. I mean, I have never ever seen, as a woman in India, I'm telling you, we've seen it all. And we do believe we've seen it all. But I have never seen the amount of discrimination the community faced. 2014, when the 377 verdict came out criminalizing homosexuality, our MDs wrote an open letter. It's still on our website. Critiquing 377 and saying a country as diverse as ours and that cares so much about pluralism should not be having, and law that we just borrowed from the British. It was then that we hired our first trans woman. Nayana Udupi was hired into our marketing team. She's still with us, and I can tell you, she's such an inspiration. You can just Google Nayana plus Thoughtworks. A huge inspiration, and continues to inspire us till today. And I think we've just opened our hearts and just embraced the community a lot more through this journey. And I'll talk more about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think, like each one of them you shared, organizations have begun a spree of diversity hiring, particularly related to gender. And I think, I'm sure all of us relate to that. And there are 2 elements that the success of this entire approach depends on, whether the term gender itself is being redefined and also includes individuals with different sexual orientations. So how many of you here know what LGBTQIA+ stands for? Show of hands. Yeah. There are quite a few hands which have not gone up. That's also because 10 years ago, like I said, it was LGBT, which all of us are pretty familiar with, but then there were other letters that got added to that. Like I said, in the true spirit of being inclusive, a lot of this kind of a movement kind of took place. So for us to align with what we are going to talk about, because this entire theme is about LGBTQI+, I think it would be good for us to define what that is. If you look at how each of them are defined, for example, Q, most of them you define it as questioning. Also because if this also stood for representing people who are probably uncertain about their sexual orientation or gender identity. Now there's also I for intersex and A for anal or asexual, depending on whom you are talking to. Often a plus sign, and this is for the benefit of everybody who wondering what that plus sign means, is meant to cover anyone else who's not included. So this theme this afternoon, we want to try and make it, one is as anecdotal as possible for us to share experiences from each of our organizations. At the same time, we want to keep it interactive, so we will save some time towards the end to have some questions from the audience. For you to learn from each of the organizations, from their practices, from their experiences, what their challenges were. And we have about 43 minutes, so we'll try and see how we can optimize these 43 minutes by asking a targeted question to each of the panelists. So Anupama, we'll start with you. So we talk about transforming workplaces, and there are a lot of things that comes under these transformed workplaces. One of the things is about inclusion. And let's talk particularly about LGBTQIA+, and why do you think this is important for organization? And I think you also are passionate about the fact that it needn't be a HR challenge alone, but it needs to become a business challenge, right? So if you could share your experience and your thoughts around that.
Absolutely. This is one thing that I'm really very proud of from Willis Watson's perspective. This journey has been led by the business, and that's very critical because as far as programs that are run by human resources goes, there's always a tendency to believe that it's somebody else's challenge, it's somebody else's scorecard, and it's one of those things that you bring in the last 10 minutes of a conversation. And in our organization, whether it is the paradigm for parity, from a gender parity perspective, or it is the LGBT plus journey, it's led by a CEO. So it's directly something that he would speak about, he carries on his goals, and all our senior leaders do. Because I believe that somewhere it starts, the commitment has to start from the top. And in no ways am I trying to say that it's easy, even for the people at the senior level positions, to come through this journey. Everybody comes from a different conditioning, everybody has their start points. However, having that common commitment at the top ensures that we can then go to the next part, which is to have a very clear, defined action plan. And that action plan includes, in some ways, setting a goal for yourselves as an organization. For example, on the gender parity side, we signed something called the Paradigm for Parity, which many people might have heard, where we have committed to ourselves and to the market and investors very publicly that we will accomplish gender parity in leadership by 2030. On the LGBT plus front, while we say that, okay, India is not that advanced, Asia probably a bit more, the US, a lot more conversations for a longer time. However, in 2016, 30 very senior leaders, including our CEO, got together to sign an open letter against discriminatory laws against LGBT+. The reason this is important is to make our intent very public, very solid, our commitment to how we're going to go about this, very structured. There's lots of people who are passionate about this. There's lots of people very confused about this. Okay? And it's important for us at the grassroots level to create the awareness of what are these unconscious biases that one might have. The very reason that they are unconscious means we don't always recognize that we have them. And it's also very confusing for the mid-level managers or the first-time managers, because they're sometimes in the situation of, I don't think I can do anything. You know, I think anything that I do is going to be offensive to someone. You know, and some of the discussions that we encourage at the grassroots level are about having that mutual accountability. You know, so the leaders will explain to the more junior leaders the kind of situations they've encountered. How do you watch out for the unconscious biases? There's a lot of training that is done on this, because it's, let's just accept, in certain conditioned backgrounds, it's not natural, right? And one of the things that comes to mind when we combine this sort of very strategic level commitment to very definitive tactical measures. We had a panel on LGBT+ last year. We had some very interesting speakers, and one of them was describing this incident. He said there was somebody who had a gender identity of male, and she could not talk about it because it wasn't something that was highly encouraged. Now, because she was very firm in her gender identity, she did not want to use the ladies' restroom. Okay? But because she knew the colleagues had so much gender dysphoria, she could not use the men's restroom either. And so she would actually not go to the toilet for the entire day at the workplace. Okay. She would actually not, and there would be times when she was reduced to tears. A small measure on this, as part of what we call the BU at WTW. Just bring your whole self to work, whoever you are. Feel safe. We introduced gender-neutral washrooms, a very small step, and it wasn't even to encourage people to come out. It doesn't matter. If somebody wants to, it's fine. If somebody doesn't want to, it's fine. But are we having the right kind of infrastructure, the facilities for people who want to come out to just be comfortable in their space? So that's how we combine it at WTW, where we have the overarching goal, the commitment from the top, with very actionable plans, and then really specific actions at the grassroots level.
Lovely, Anupama. I think it all starts with probably metrics, the numbers, because you need to start somewhere. But then, it's really about do we look at systems or the spirit, right? When Anupama said, "Be you," how many of us really think gender before we, when we leave home and enter workplaces, right? So I think it's very important for us to look at the spirit rather than the metrics alone. Probably we get started with metrics, but we can definitely look at what is the thing beyond metrics to make this an experiential thing rather than just a metric-driven thing. So thank you so much for that. So Tina, you talked about Section 377. So what should we as D&I professionals, as corporate India, know about Section 377?
Actually, there's nothing much to know. 377 or without 377, you can still hire and you can still have people from the LGBTQI community as part of your organization. And you should not be using it as an excuse for not doing it. Basically, 377 says sexual activity which is against the law of nature is criminalized. This was introduced in 1864. Can you imagine? 1864 by the British. And they withdrew it long time back, but India refused to do it. And it was only in 2018, after multiple, petitions, that the law was reversed, September 2018. But that said, progressive organizations have always been inclusive, hiring from the community and opening their doors to the LGBTQI community way before that. And so a really, an appeal that goes out from me to all of you all is, don't worry about 377. It has nothing to do with your policies. It will not adversely affect your organization in any way. In fact, as proven and, as we've all seen, right? Diverse teams impact your business positively, impact your organizational culture, and the best thing to do is to hire from a diverse set of people irrespective of who they are and where they come from.
Absolutely. I think clearly there is metrics and data that clearly shows why it is important to focus on diversity. Because there are facts which clearly says diversity and inclusion is a business imperative. Diverse workforce creates sustainable organizations. What's not really a fact is diversity automatically translates into inclusion. How many of you believe that? Diversity automatically translates into inclusion. Show of hands. Yeah, sometimes you feel diversity is an abused word. I rather focus on inclusion than diversity. So, talking about inclusion, Tina, what are your thoughts about being an inclusive workplace, bringing your whole self to work? What are your thoughts on that?
So, if diversity and inclusion is not really interwoven into your organizational culture, into your fundamentals of who you are as a business, it's very difficult to treat it as a separate entity that comes under the HR umbrella and seen as a good thing to do, but not a necessary thing to do. You can bring as much diversity to your organization as possible, but it will all fall flat in the face if you are not inclusive. And it's very important when you talk about bringing your authentic self to work, that every employee treats each other with respect and empathy, right? And it can cross, and of course it is a spectrum. It is the spectrum of gender, it could be religion, it could be educational background, and so many different things, right? And today, if we don't really look at that, the whole larger picture is going to be very difficult. But specifically at Thoughtworks, there are multiple things that we do. Definitely policies like our anti-sexual harassment policy also includes anti-discrimination as well. It's gender neutral. And we ensure that in addition to new joinees just signing a policy document, there is a session conducted for everyone. We also ensure that there is an e-learning module which has specific examples of LGBTQI discrimination scenarios that are shared and people understand what it is and know what not to do. We also run something called the Being Inclusive program, and this is an unconscious bias training that every employee has to attend. It's a 4-hour training program that's not run by the HR, that's not run by the D&I team, that's not run by an external vendor, but is run by the leadership of the organization. So you would have people who are right from the MDs to functional leads to office heads running these sessions for us. And I think that's brought about a huge change in the way we look at inclusion, right? Because unless your leaders really know and understand what inclusion is, it's very difficult to be expecting that from a grad who joins the organization.
Thank you so much, Vinod, for that. Pratyusha, I'll come to you now. If you can share some examples from your experience at Cognizant on where you are on this journey of one, inclusion, and specifically on LGBTQIA+. And if you can share some best practices and examples for our audience and for us, that would be great.
Thanks, Sindhu. So I think when we started off this journey, and as all of us say, diversity is all about inclusion. And we really looked at the mode of how, be it people with disabilities, gender diversity, LGBTQ, how inclusive our work culture is. And a couple of years back, we really started off, and then the Section 377 came into picture. And we said the real challenge, what Tina and Anupama also spoke, is it's top-down, right, leadership. year, we actually had the presidents of the company. We invited some client partners who are our clients. We actually invited our vendor partners into a summit like this. And we actually had Rani, there was a transgender, there was a gay, there was a lesbian, who came and shared their stories. It was so inspiring. It actually touched the heart of and the mind of every president who was sitting in the room. It was all CEOs and presidents. And it really told them what is the acceptance levels. So clearly in Cognizant and most of our organizations, I think the top three things we really look at: how do you create an environment? How do you make it a very inclusive environment? So keeping that in mind, we had these sessions where we said top-down leadership commitment is very important. The second is, how do we really support it with the policies and sustain this, right? I think you have to create an environment, support them as well as sustain. So we started off with some of our understanding what the policies we can offer. And we said the same-sex partner benefits. We actually introduced it and we asked people to come and give an affidavit, declare, as well as being able to use that. The benefits what the other partners do get in terms of health insurance and a couple of other benefits. The second policy which actually came into play is into the entire transgender, the sex change from male to female, female to male, which is a part of our insurance policies. So when we started doing this, interestingly, last year, people came out and they asked, so 2-3 years from the last 10 years, they have been there, they've been struggling because the family has not been accepting them. The friends have not been accepting them. So they didn't know where to go out. So when we started making the environment very, very conducive and inclusive, so there was somebody who said, you know, I want to change my gender and I'm really going for my surgeries and this is the amount, this is what we need. We included as a part of the insurance policy from then on, and people started coming out and realizing we are a very supportive and inclusive environment. And, you know, he said before going for the surgery, how do I come back? How will I be accepted? Today I'm Sai-Kiran, I'm coming back as Gayatri. How do I come back? So it's like a moment which he didn't know how he's going to react. Instead, we did a lot of practices around all of these incidences which we have seen. We came up with the LGBTQ handbook, which we worked with our external partners. So the handbook really talks about how can a manager deal with such situations, how employees themselves can understand the identity crisis, right? Sometimes people are confused with which sexuality they are in. They don't know. So there was one of the girls who said, we live in hostels, we are there, we don't know which level we think that we are sexually oriented to another girl. So, you know, there are a lot of identity crises everybody faces, be it a gay, lesbian, or any of this community people. So the entire handbook actually equips an employee to understand what sexuality and gender means, what the whole identity crisis is. It tells a manager on how to ask the right questions and be able to be sensitive to it. Right? And I think this was one of the biggest things we've done, other than the e-learnings, trainings, as well as so many other sessions which the business led it is. It was very interesting to see how we have been using an embrace group. So most of you use Yammer. So we actually created an embrace group. And we said it's a moderated conversations where people have come out globally and said they are part of it and the kind of problems are faced. So it's a community which is very, very, very knitted and we have so many questions. So we have empaneled counselors, we have a DNI help desk for the group, and allies. I'm sure all of us are allies for this and that's why we are here. So who is it that who's an ally, who really encourages, who actually is very sensitive, who's really supporting and creating this culture? So this embrace group has really helped people to come out. So there were a lot of work we did in being able to create that environment for the organization, for the people to come out, ask the questions. And as Anupama said, we had the gender neutral washrooms which have opened up in a couple of our locations. We're doing a lot, again, in the West it's been adopted quite a bit. So we have a center in Manila where we had the first transgender woman who was actually Miss Philippines Cognizant, right? So we really encourage and celebrate. So So people who are ready to come out and speak. So we had recently in BBC, one of our employees came out and he spoke. So we encourage people to come internally as well as external speakers. We called them and we asked them to share their stories, what was interested. That's when they feel that they're more accepted and they've created an environment.
Wow. I mean, I think this deserves a big hand. I mean, such stories are so powerful, it's so progressive, and I think to be the leader in that space, to be able to take lead, to make some of those changes consciously, and to make the others comfortable. And I'm sure all of us here will agree that whatever our upbringing has been, we always feared facing this because we didn't know whether we were doing the right thing, whether we were speaking the right language, we were addressing them respectfully, right? And I think that has been the fear. The intent has always been great, it has always been to do the right thing, but you didn't know whether your actions said the same thing, right? So that has always been personally my fear too. But just taking the whole support group and ability thing forward, Anupama, this is for you. What do you think is the value of support groups, especially family, society, friends, your peer group? What have you seen in your experience, whether it's at the workplace or outside, where support groups have actually played a critical role in bringing down the discrimination, the stereotyping of the LGBTQI plus community?
I was thinking about this incident of a friend who wasn't getting married, and he had come out, and his parents were still having difficulty accepting that he was gay, and they brought out an advertisement in the classified of the newspaper, and in that they basically said, looking for a man, saying, whatever it is, at least get married. And the kind of responses were apparently, as is to be expected, they ranged from serious to absolutely ludicrous. But in all of this, from a family support standpoint, as parents, and the fact that they were even making that effort made him feel so grateful. Although he was also trying to say, I don't want to get married because I want to be economically stable and I don't think I'm prepared for marriage. But then comes the grandmother, and I'm not really talking about which side of India they come from and all of that, because actually for me it makes it doubly hilarious. But this grandmother who is very traditionally dressed and very traditional in her upbringing and outlook, so he goes to her and he says, you realize that mom and dad are trying to look for someone for me and I might get married. And she said, okay, that's good, you should get married. And then he said, I'm looking to get married to a guy. She doesn't have an idea. And she says, as long as you marry within the community. I don't care if it's so there are just so many biases and yet so many unexpected forms of support that you get. She said, as long as you continue to have the traditional practices we have, it's fine if it's a guy or girl. And the parents, of course, were struggling. And the reason that I said that is, no matter how much we talk about allies and friends, that uncertainty of how you approach, and this was again something that I asked very openly, saying people are apprehensive. They assume positive intent, right? So people have the positive intent, but they don't know what to say, which is a bit silly because you have a lot of information. But let's assume that people have the right intent and they don't know what to say. So is it okay to make a joke? Is it okay to ask you a question? And he said the same rules apply like any other human interaction. Be decent, be courteous, and be authentic. If you want to ask me a question which is clearly I'm going to be able to make out whether you're being courteous and decent and authentic, I would love to answer it. I don't have a problem with it. If the question is going to come in the form of a very, cliched, and I like your example, some of our movies, oh my gosh, I mean the extent of stereotypical, caricaturish characters that are
created, if you make those kind of jokes, guess what? If I make a joke about you like that, you're going to be offended too. So in many ways, the same rules apply. I know of a company that was trying to get onto this journey, and in the Pride March, right? Management turned up, saying, okay, finally, we are going to show our support. Guess what happened? The people from the company, not just the allies, but people who were thinking about coming out, and so they came out of curiosity for the Pride, etc. The minute they knew management was there, they scooted. So none of them were there. The management was looking around saying, we heard our employees were there. None of them were there, which means somewhere the authenticity of the intent is not coming through. But the ground rules are just like any other interaction. Be sensitive, be polite, be decent, and if you're unsure, ask what you prefer.
Thank you. Can I just add to that? Sure. We often talk about allyship within our friend circle and our families, right? But I think one of the greatest allies could be your colleagues yourself. Sometimes we downplay the number of hours we spend at work and the number of hours we spend with our colleagues. It's literally like second family, right? And the fact is we spend most of our waking hours at work, barring the commute. And one of the things that we have noticed is we started something called the Mitra Collective, which is an affinity group for people from the LGBTQI community and its allies. And when we started Mitra Collective, we weren't very sure how much participation there would be. We have 6 offices in India, 7th one recently started. We've seen a steady trickle of people joining Mitra Collective. It's very strong now. A lot of changes and driven grassroots level. And through Mitra Collective came a wonderful program. 2 people who were part of the program, part of the group, but also who cared very deeply about the LGBTQI community right here from our Hyderabad office. Archana and Shujan conceptualized something called the Interning with Pride. Interning with Pride is a 5-month internship program that we offered in our Hyderabad office for people from the LGBTQI community who needed upskilling. One of the biggest challenges the community faces even after they complete their education is they don't get the opportunity to work. They don't get accepted, especially those who are out and proud. And so when we offered this, 4 people joined the internship program. All 4 of them completed 5 months. And they are now employees of Thoughtworks. And I can just tell you that the amount of effort, once 2 very, very young, and these are not very senior people who started the program, extremely young, the idea, the thought behind it, the empathy of their actions, right from how we went about recruiting, the messaging that went out on our website, how we went about interviewing those individuals, everything was done keeping broader inclusion in mind, and also with a lot of respect for the community. And I would say that today the millennials and the Gen Z, there's larger inclusion with this generation than I've ever seen before, so we have a lot of positive hope.
That's really awesome. Internship, guys, come on, let's give them a good hand. What an innovative idea. Especially if you're starting off on this journey where you really want to sensitize your organization to becoming more inclusive, I think this is a great way to get started. So thank you so much. That was really a wonderful idea, and I'm sure a lot of us will take away a lot of insights from all your thoughts. Pride Month. I think June, all of you know that it is a Pride Month, and here is a time for us to actually become more conscious, also celebrate different sexual orientation. And so, question for all my panelists here: what is that you're doing, this month, and what are some of the things that you want to share with your audience that you're doing differently, and maybe we have best practices and unique ideas like some of those that you already shared, and how do you think organizations are prepared? Because I know in many organizations, maybe in the Western world, it's a very common thing for someone to participate in a Pride Month. In India, it's just picking up. So, if you can bring that context of India and Pride Month, Pratyusha, would
first year we celebrated the Pride Month, and we started off a lot of visual displays like the BU, what LGBTQ, and Embrace group. So there's been a lot of allies who were in support. We had badges, we had cups, so there are a lot of giveaways which we have given out, showcasing that we are accepting and creating an inclusive work environment. I think there's been a lot of work done around that. And the second is, as I mentioned earlier, we invited a lot of people within Cognizant as well as outside Cognizant to come and share their stories. And it was very interesting to see as a part of an Embrace group, right, the kind of discussions and people really added on. I think the number in the Embrace group which I spoke about actually increased twofold in the month of Pride. So that was a big, big win. And for us to be able to say that we have created that environment. And just to take on from the family affinity groups, I don't know how many of you all have watched the Urban Club advertisement. Yeah, so I think the Urban Club advertisement talks about how the mother is really supporting the gender change of the son. And it's so touching. So we actually shared such kind of videos to be able to share, be it Urban Club, OnePlus, Uber Eats, where two transgenders are living together and creating a purpose for their life. And even in the Urban Club video, the guy goes out as Vikram, and she's all in out to be able to celebrate Women's Day. And when he comes back as she, so there's so much of emotional trauma Vikram, who was Vikram, was going through. And you could see really how is going to be accepted by the aunt, by the mother, as well as by the others. And the mother was so supportive that if she was really making that difference of accepting the child, all the others really got into the okay, and it was so much of a relief for the person to come out. And there are organizations like this with advertising and companies doing. So we actually played a lot of these things through skip and creating a purpose across for everybody.
Thank you so much, Pratyusha. So, obviously, the Pride March has been very successful in other countries, and we've been building up the momentum over the last 2 or 3 years by playing for the Indian audience what happens, having these smaller sets of discussions to prepare people for why this is important for people, and to also take out that expectation that you're suddenly going to see a group that is different from you and you have to treat them nicely, not to really make it a big deal, because in your skit, right, we were there for a few minutes, and it's all about accepting the whole of your colleague, right, bring the whole of who you are. So one of the conversations that one person said is, you have a picture of your family at your desk, right? And most of the audience said yes. Is that true for many of you here? You have a picture of your family at your desk? Yeah. Would it really matter if that family looked different for somebody else? So a lot of discussions around the realism of what somebody's journey is and accepting that. But one of the things that we did at a very global level is to actually change our logo for the period of the Pride Month. At a very global graphic level that was very, very important. And again, at the ground level, we actually have introduced pronouns of choice. So in every email that goes out, whether it's within or to our clients, people have started indicating how they would like to be referred. And that's, again, an encouragement for people to be themselves if they would like to. But give them enough safe avenues to be themselves.
I think that safety and security is key. Thank you, Anupama. Tina?
I think this is the 4th year that we're celebrating the Pride Month, and it started off with a letter from our joint MDs announcing Pride Month, and 2 major focus areas is going to be sensitization and awareness workshops across all our offices, and there will be movie screenings followed by discussions. But then Mitra Collective across each of the offices is very active, doing a lot of fun activities. As I talk, there is a rainbow arch that's been created in the Bangalore office cafeteria, and there's a selfie contest that's going on, and people who post those photographs with the hashtags win wonderful prizes. There have been doodle competitions, there have been painting competitions, there's been, leadership participating and talking about their journey. So it's a fun month, but most importantly, I think it is also a month to reflect and to also come together as a collective and see how we can show solidarity and support to the community.
That's awesome. I think we have a lot of takeaways from what you've shared. Sure.
I just wanted to add one point, right? I think the first step we took is to get our HR systems right. And most of you all were there. And as a part of the HR systems made so the way we do it is of course in all the global locations. But in India, I think to get our HR systems of male, female, and the next gender. So I don't think we have a very strong systems there. And that was something which we launched as a part of the Pride Month to be able to ensure our legalities, our laws, and try to bring that in our hiring HR systems. So I just thought I should share.
I think that's a very important aspect because you don't think so much, especially infrastructure, systems, policies. Are you being gender neutral? When you are actually formulating some of those. So with that, now we'll open up the audience to ask any questions, any comments, reaction, feedback. Anything that you want to share with us. We have about 8 minutes. Yes, we can take about 2 of them and then go ahead. Do we have a mic? We have.
The LGBTQIA are a little more privileged than the transgender community itself because they don't have access to schools and education and all that. And one of the things you mentioned was you did conduct a training program where. But how ready are they? How ready is the community to embrace it? From a workplace readiness perspective, I think you've kind of done everything that's required. But I'm more interested to understand as a community, how ready are they to embrace this change?
So, a lot more struggle. And you would see that not many of them are ready to take on jobs in the corporate sector compared to the LGBT. Okay, I'm just keeping it simple as LGBT. But there are organizations who offer that. For example, when we did interning with Pride, all 4 of them were not from the trans community. Right? But there are organizations who offer a lot of support and training. Solidarity Foundation is one such organization. And they have a training program specifically that does multi-skill training, right from soft skills, right from preparing people to be able to work in beauty parlors, to be able to work in the administrative function, in the finance function. And they start from there and then they start with the upskilling. So yes, it is tough. And one thing I would suggest for organizations is there are wonderful, non-profits and support organizations that are out there who can. Periphery is one of them. Periphery is one such organization that works on finding employment opportunities for transgender people. And do reach out to them if you want to open your doors for the trans community.
So just to add on, right, we're participating in the LGBTQ job fair next month. And that's where you will be able to understand what is the skills or the education level of people, and we're actually going there to more observe, right, on kind of interviewing questions, how do we really assess the people as well as be sensitized towards what they can bring as abilities to the table, right? And I think that's a very powerful area which most of the organizations should participate to be able to assess and bring in more and partner with those NGOs who are actually skilling the transgender to be able to bring them on board.
Yeah, just to elaborate, it's called RISE, R-I-S-E, and it's the first LGBTQ plus job fair in India. It's on the 12th of July in Bangalore at the Lalita Show, and we are participating in sponsoring as well. But please see how you can get involved.
The one other thing that we are trying out is actually to have an exchange between Manila and Mumbai, right? Because in Manila, the openness to this is tremendously high, and it's really agnostic and There are people who have spoken with their colleagues there, they have interacted on email, but having them here and then understand just how agnostic of identity there are leads to opening up of the minds. Now, does that answer your question of how to source them? Perhaps not, but you also need to be aware of whether you're prepared. And for example, we believe we will take some more time to prepare for it, and hence we are in the preparation stage, and that's why we are bringing the women and colleagues over.
I think that's very good, because I think one is, do we partner with organizations who can support us bringing in those people into the organization? But the other side is, are you prepared to embrace them? In terms of sensitization workshops and all the education that is required around that. So thanks so much. We have one more. We could probably take one more. Yes.
Hello, I'm Jayanti from Absa Software. I'm heading their HR. So I'm not with a question. I want to share an experience. I'm a single parent and I have a child. And recently he went through an operation and in a leading hospital in Hyderabad. So there was a form which I had to fill in, and there was a place where I had to mention about the father's name. And they insisted me that I should actually go and fill in, where I was very reluctant to do that, because that was a place which I could not go and do actually. So I'm not a person from the special community or someone, but then also I have to face this embarrassment. So I just wonder, the people who are actually from this special community, day in, day out, what is the amount of embarrassment?
Conversation where I wonder, to your point about readiness, but I commend you for the fact that you paused and you stopped, because it's so easy to give in. Just write your father's name, just write the Mrs. and get on with life, right? And similarly, put your gender as male or female and get on with it. But for people who are willing to support, people who want to make that choice, we should insist on saying, write out what you want, strike